Hey everyone, we are back for more Peppermints in the Parlor. I thought there were 2 chapters left, but there's actually 3. I'm gonna try and record them all today, and then you guys will see them posting for the rest of this week. So let's get into this. Chapter 16 is called The Scary Individual. This was Emily's first exit from Sugar Hill Hall since her arrival there, and all she was doing was going from a known terror to an unknown one. Even inside the comfort of Kipper's pa's great coat, she shivered. A night fog thick as fish chowder hung over the city of San Francisco. Emily could barely see Kipper right beside her as they crept from the back door of the mansion, out past the coach house and down an alley to the street. Once out of the alley, Kipper's footsteps flew over cobbles long familiar to them, and so intent he was in reaching his destination, he suddenly grew as silent as the fog. Emily had to struggle to keep up with him, her breath snatched from her throat, her feet aching from the hard stones. Thump, thump, thump. Was the sound of footsteps real, or had she finally become that ghost outside the train window, seeking but never finding a home? Gaslights flickered palely through the fog, and an occasional dark shadow borne past them on the muffled drum of the horse's hooves only made Emily feel more than ever that she had entered another world. Thump, thump, thump. The cobblestone tripping Emily was all too real. With a gasp, she reached out for Kipper. Kipper snatched her arm before she could fall. Well, if I ain't the stupidest, going long with my noggin buried in the fog, I plain forgot you ain't ever been on these streets before. Emily was happy to feel Kipper's warm, reassuring hand close to hers on her cold one, but it was still impossible to keep from feeling frightened as they plunged through the dark streets, and the journey became even more treacherous when they left the part of the city that had long since gone to sleep and arrived at the part that would not go to sleep until dawn. The streets were teemed with life, but a kind of life Emily would not have recognized from her darkest dreams. She almost wished she were back in the remembrance room as Kipper pulled her past dingy store windows, dark, evil doorways, and doors that swung open to let escape bursts of coarse laughter. She felt a terrible chill inside at the sight of faces swirling around her. Brutish, bearded faces under strange-looking caps, pockmarked faces with slanted eyes, hideous flat faces without noses and too thick lips, and ladies' faces as brittle and bright as painted china plates. Emily shuddered and then felt Kipper's hand tighten around hers. Told you about this part of town, Emily. Ain't the best time, but night is when the rats come up from the sewers of San Francisco. But we're about there, so don't give up. Kipper was right. Soon they reached over the waterfront and a row of shops, which, unlike the others they had just passed, had been put to bed for the night. Here it was quiet enough for water to be heard lapping softly against the wharfs. And here 'tis. Kipper pointed proudly to a small darkened shop with a sign over it in the shape of a fish. So large, it looked like it would swallow the shop and everyone in it in one bite. Kipper let go Emily's hand to unlock the door. Come along, Emily, this way. Kipper beckoned to the staircase at the back of the little shop. Only one dim light burned inside, so Emily could gather the barest impressions of wooden kegs and vats neatly laid out in front of a tiny counter. But she could feel a friendly sawdust under her feet like a welcoming carpet. It was only her first visit to Kipper's pa's shop. Could have been under brighter circumstances. Pa, Pa, Kipper called out. Pa, are you there? Silence was his only reply. Now they entered a small, cozy room that could have passed for a ship's cabin, except for one bright pink geranium blooming in around a window on the sink. The window looked so much like a porthole, Emily was surprised to see there were not waves dashing against it. A ship's oil lamp on the wall and a flickering candle on the table lit the room. But the only sign of life apparent was a small boy seated on the bench of a scrubbed pine table, his head laid down on it, and his tousled blonde hair tumbling over his hands. He was fast asleep, Was this the scary, nameless individual Emily had been brought to see? It was almost a cause for laughter. Little Shrimper, wake up. Kipper shook his shoulders gently. Where's Pa? Little Shrimper rubbed his eyes sleepily. Gone for someone, Kipper. Don't know who, 'cause it weren't a name whispered to him by... He jerked a thumb towards bunk beds in a corner of the room. Emily's eyes followed in the direction of the small thumb, and she began to tremble. What she had thought was simply a mountain of bed quilts and blankets and the lower limb of 2 bunks now suddenly arranged itself into what it truly was, a figure of a man. It's who you come to see, Emily, Kipper said soberly as he turned back to Little Shrimper. He ain't dead yet, is he? Little Shrimper's eyes widened into big round O's. Clearly death was not something he bargained for. Pa didn't say so. Then he probably ain't. Kipper strode towards the bunks and lit a small oil lamp that hung on one bedpost. Then he leaned over the lower bunk to hold out a testing finger. No, he ain't, he concluded matter-of-factly. Then he beckoned to Emily. This ain't gonna be pleasant, but you best come to see what you was brung for, Emily. This here's the individual that wants to speak to you, though don't look like he's able to right now. Emily hesitated, but knew that in the end she would have to make that short but terrible journey. Slowly she crossed the room. When she arrived at the bunk, she took one quick look at the man lying stiff and still as a log, and her breath stopped in her throat. She had seen his face only twice before, but her mind had been carved forever by the rubbery lips, the bulbous nose decorated with a large black wart, and a hideous gash running from cheek to chin. Now under his face, turned gray as an oyster shell, a stain on the chest of a seaman's uniform was opening up like swift, blooming, blood-red rose. Captain Spurlock, Emily whispered. She had to turn her eyes from the sight. No other, said Kipper. Sorry you had to do this to you, Emily, but he was afraid if he knew 'twas wanted, you might likely not a wanted to come. But how did he get here? Emily asked. What's this about? Well, Kipper rubbed a ear thoughtfully. Since the captain ain't in present condition to speak his piece, and Pa ain't back yet, I guess I can tell you what I know. Let's set at the table with Little Shrimper. Pa's got water boiling, so us can fix us a nice cup of tea with one whole lump of sugar in each. Me too, piped in Little Shrimper. Kipper smiled at him. You too. Emily fell gratefully onto a bench at the table, happy to be able to leave the sight of the dead apparition on the bunk. Oh, come to think of it, Little Shrimper, this here's Emily, which generously donated the peppermint to you, Kipper said cheerily. That was shading the truth a bit, but didn't seem to concern him. Little Shrimper stared at Emily with round eyes. Then he dipped into a well-worn pocket and pulled out a filthy rag, which he promptly laid open. Inside rested the peppermint, or at least what remained of it. And I still got it too, he said proudly. I only sucks a bit of it before bedtime. Might even last another week. At that moment, Emily wished she had 100 more peppermints to fill that little pocket. Now, said Kipper, setting down 3 mismatched pottery mugs of steaming tea. The story begins with me visiting the cellar of the Jolly Sailor 4 come into the remembrance room to find out if the Snake Lady and Mrs. P was there. If they was, I was thinking how you and me, Emily, could make a little trip to the end of the tunnel to find out how them 2 vanished last night. Well, the 2 of them was there all right, but what was likewise there was a whole lot of arguing and fighting, such as you've never seen, with the Snake Lady screeching and hissing, and Mrs. P hollering and snarling. Next thing you know, before I had a chance to break out of the room comes Captain Spurlock, bleeding like a harpooned whale, as Pa always says. Let him go back to his ship and die, screeches the Snake Lady. We'll throw his body to the sharks later, snarls Mrs. P. Meanwhile, Captain goes on staggering the stairs and not wanting to be unfriendly like, I jump from my hiding place and offer him a hand. Nobody noticed us staggering out, which ain't surprising, things running as they usually run at the Jolly Sailor. But once we got outside, the captain turns to me and said, half dead like, ain't ye the boy that works from time to time at Sugar Hill Hall? Same boy, though I don't work there much anymore, I said. But ye must know the child, Emily Lockhart, says he. That I do, says I. Well, I must speak to her, says he. There are things I must tell her. I cannot go to my Maker with such dark secrets on my soul, so I'll be much obliged if ye could take me to Emily Luckock quick as can be, because I ain't got good for more many breaths on this earth. I'll do my best, Captain, I says, but knowing as how the size of him and the size of me, I might never make it to Sugar Hill Hall. Why, I brung him here to Pa's place. Pa and me decided as how to fetch you, with me promising the captain on my life not to tell you about who was requesting your presence. You know about the rest, Emily. More tea? Kipper hopped up and started for the kettle. Halfway there, he stopped and turned to the stairs listening. Sounds like Pa's back. Sounds like he's got someone with him. Who do you guys think is with him? What do you think the captain is going to tell Emily? You will see soon. Bye, guys.